Scott Morrison, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Sharri. Welcome to the Shire.
Thank you. The Albanese government now is putting a lot of focus trying to repair the trade relationship. What advice and words of caution would you have? Do you think Xi Jinping still believes in free trade?
Free trade is not doing trade with someone and then using it to bash them over the head with. I mean, that's what Putin's doing and tried to do with the Europeans. With Xi Jinping and his China, there is an intent to leverage and indeed punish if they feel that those they're doing trade with are not signed up to their broader objectives. Now, that's not free trade. I think that's quite coercive trade. And that coercion was applied to Australia. And when I was Prime Minister, we had a choice. Stare it down or roll over.
Well, on the Indo-Pacific, what do you think China's goals are ultimately in that region?
Hegemony. That's pretty much it. Hegemony, to be the controlling power throughout the Indo-Pacific, whether that's in the South China Sea or even further south. It's to be the dominating and controlling influence over economic, strategic, the environment in that part of the world.
Do you think America should have had a stronger leadership role at that time?
If you go back to when China was turning island atolls into airports, it was in the Biden administration, there was no one saying no. And they were testing the limits of the West. And when you keep getting the answer of, well, they're not doing anything, they're not saying no, they're not resisting, well, why would he stop?
The late Senator and former Australian Army Major General Jim Molan, he said Australia was not prepared for a conflict in our region, and he said the position was precarious with what he saw as America's military decline at the same time as China is engaging in a massive military build-up. His recent book, Danger on Our Doorstep, was compared by Tony Abbott to Winston Churchill's While England Slept, published in 1938, and warned of the dangers of a war in Europe, as you know, shortly before the outbreak of World War II. Do you agree with Jim Molan's bleak assessment?
Now, the question is which, if any, countries in the region on their own would be able to resist a country with that military strength? And I think the honest answer to that is no country on their own can, and any country that pretends that they can do so.
And that includes Australia?
Yeah, that could do it solely on its own.
So we wouldn't be prepared for conflict on our own?
No, what I'm saying is that being prepared isn't just having your own capability, it's having the interlocking alignments and alliances that actually provide the counterbalance to the threat. See, the best outcome is there is no such conflict.
But having said that, it is still, isn't it, a terrifying thought that if Australia stood alone, we would not be able to withstand an attack or an invasion from China?
Well, there's no country, I would argue, almost on earth that could say they were other than the United States. I mean, that's just the reality. We're a country of just over 25 million people. I mean, their defence budget is multiple times that of Australia.
Shouldn't we be able to stand alone? Shouldn't we invest in our defence budget so that we could, even more, so that we could withstand?
Well, yes. I think our defence budget needs to get to 2.5% of GDP.
But it's clearly not enough.
Well, I think we need to go to 2.5%. I think, but these goals are not ends in themselves. That is just an indication of where Australia's level of defence investment needs to be. Now, I would agree also with Jim that it's not just about lifting that investment, it's about what the investment's in. And particularly when it comes to our missile defence, drones and all of that, of course they are the things that need to be added. Of course they are. No one disagrees with that.
Unmanned drones, that was something that's been raised today.
All of the above. You know, all of the above and more, and keep going there. But that alone, if we think that just doing that would actually protect Australia without what is arguably the even more urgent task is to ensure that those interlocking alliances and partnerships and alignments are in place. I mean, that's
why you focus so much on the Quad, on the United States.
Exactly, because that is what changes the calculus in the region. On paper, which is what the assessments of where China is done. On paper. On paper, that's all very real. In practice, the calculations that would now be made about the ability to actually follow through would be very much jolted by the experience in Ukraine.
Taiwan is the biggest story of our lifetime, the biggest issue of our lifetime. Do you think Australia would be obligated to join the fight if the United States stepped in to either defend it from Chinese aggression or even a Chinese invasion?
Well, I think there's a strategic ambiguity about this, and I think it does provide a real check and an uncertainty about Chinese calculations on this issue. The idea that conflict in the Taiwan Strait and in that region more generally not having some direct negative consequence for Australia's national interests is ridiculous. Of course it would.
As Prime Minister, were you prepared for a potential conflict in Taiwan Straits within a 2-year period?
Well, it's very difficult to answer the question, Sharri. Did we do everything we had within our disposal to put us in the strongest possible position? Yes, we did. Those predictions of, well, could they do this in 2 years? Well, who knows? I mean, the Russians thought they could take Kyiv in 2 days, right? So those assessments are... Jim used to say, you know, no strategy survives contact with the enemy. Once things are going down, everything changes. And so you take with a grain of salt a bit, you know, the many assessments that are given, and you look, okay, what's Australia's situation? Well, we are most at risk by having an unstable region where there is no effective counterbalance which changes the Chinese calculus.
Submarines has been a fraught area for a very long time. Do you think ultimately now we will end up with US submarines or British submarines?
When we devised AUKUS,
yes, it
began with discussions in terms of a boat that was a British boat. And it evolved into a discussion which potentially involved a US boat. Now, I see the reports now. I'm no more let into the secret than you are, being Post Office. But it seems that there's some discussion about them going down the direction of a British boat with a US weapon system. That would fall completely into the original aspirations and intentions of AUKUS. Now, but what we did was we didn't want to prejudge that outcome. That's not a decision that should be made by politicians alone. I think leaders have an important role to play in the ultimate decision there.